actually, we're grateful that the two girls wanted to come down here and go with our kids and end up being in the youth group, and then along comes Diana to be our administrative assistant, and we get Mike, and so Aunt Judy's in on that, so we got some nice additions. But anyway, Mike's going to lead us in some material that is going to help the church get a better grasp of what we should be doing and what kind of a minister we might need to help us in that respect. So the other thing I want you to remember is CEM, Christian Evangelistic Mission, and that's what Mike heads up, the group that starts new churches in our state, and does a lot of other things. And one of the things he does is what he's doing here tonight. He's been doing with lots of churches, and I'm glad to see that, because we can have new churches and churches out here that need some help, and you're giving them help. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So let's pray, and we'll get started tonight. Father, thank you for this evening, for Mike willing to lead us in the study, and for those who have taken of their very precious time to come. I just pray, Lord, that we can be attentive, that we can pray over this, that we can implement some of the things that he talks about, and the congregation can go forward, that ultimately we can find a minister, and all of that will come together. So again, just guide us tonight in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right, thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. All right. So did everybody get their book? All right. Can everybody see this? Okay. Hopefully I'll be able to write on it and we can see it and everything. So fantastic. Let me pass these out. Maybe about half and half. This is our schedule. So a couple things about this. If you could have the chapters on the dates read before class, that would be great. And then there's also a link on there. We're recording this, so if you want to listen to it again, or if you miss one, you'll be able to listen to the audio. So, all right. So, get my stuff out here. Let's see. So did anybody get a chance to read the intro in chapter 1? Okay. So just first impressions, what did you think so far? Okay. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and start with the intro. Let me write my email down too. If you have any questions, you can certainly write it, ask them in class. If you want to ask me something that you thought of later, or if you're reading it during the week, you can send me an email. So it's pretty easy, cemdirector@gmail.com. Well, I just love this stuff. I wish I'd have known this 30 years ago when I got started. This is the nuts and bolts of how leadership works. A lot of times, we understand leadership as kind of a natural born thing where somebody is just born with leadership kind of a thing. But the neat thing about this is we can actually all learn to be better leaders from the standpoint of influencers kind of the thing. So in the intro, he talks about everything rises and falls on leadership. And then one of the things that's real important to look at this is there's an arbitrary kind of a level. And this is kind of called, he also has a book called the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and he talks about the law of the lid, and that's really what this is. But everybody has a level that we lead on, and what that does is it affects the people we're able to attract. Well, let's say I'm a level 4. What ends up happening is I'm going to attract 3s, 2s, and 1s to my organization. And what's interesting about this is it's not just church stuff, it's business, it's family, it's volunteer organization. Anybody with people in it, this applies to. So if I'm a level 4, I'm going to attract 3s, 2s, and 1s. If somebody's coming in at a higher level, they're going to be frustrated. And eventually they'll move on to another group. And a lot of times, like when I work with pastors, they'll be like a level 4, and I'll try to encourage them to grow and try to get them to see that it's important for you to grow, because if you don't, you're going to frustrate the people up here and they're going to move on. So, and I'll ask them, they'll say, well, this is just a really tough, mission field that I'm in. I go, well, I understand that. Is any church in your area growing? And they'll go like, well, yeah, the Baptists or the E-Free, but they don't believe that baptism is essential, or whatever. They have an excuse, right? But it's probably because their pastor is leading at a higher level than they are. It's just that simple kind of a thing. So it's important for us to understand this. The good news is that I can grow as an influencer. And this is not just for the pastor of the church, but it's also for any kind of thing that you might lead at the church. We all have volunteer ministries, and then that just affects who we're able to attract to our ministry and that kind of a thing. So when I was younger, one of the things that you probably heard me say is that, people told me a lot to sit down and be quiet. That's kind of the way they educated us, I guess, as kids. And I'm a boy, and I don't like to sit down or be quiet. So, in fact, I saw a T-shirt that I really want. My nephew has it, or had one, that he went to school, and it says, we'll be quiet for $100. We'll be awesome for free. So that's just kind of some things in life define who you are. That's me. So I need to get a shirt like that. But anyway, so I had all this nervous energy, and so my dad had me. We had a lot of trees in our yard when I was a kid in Wichita, and I was doing some trimming or something like that. So I was walking back to put the hedge clippers back or whatever, and we had this evergreen tree. And so I just kind of saw it, and I just kind of chopped the top off, like no big deal. And about a couple of days later, my dad noticed that the top's off of it. It's kind of, those kind of like Christmas tree looking trees, right? And he kind of goes, did you cut the top off of that? And it's kind of one of those George Washington moments, like, am I going to tell a lie or not? But so I said, yeah, so what? And he's like, it's never going to get any taller. And I go, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, it's just going to grow out like that. And it's kind of what happens when I got middle-aged. So I just grew this way. And so the good news is people aren't like that, right? We can always grow in our ability to influence others and be a more effective leader, which is good. One of the things that we do as churches, and I'm speaking in general, I'm not just picking on you guys because I work with a lot of churches and everything, and what I've observed is that we tend to, when it's time to elect elders, if we call them that, or what do we do in our church, we look at 1 Timothy 3 and we just talk about the qualifications, right? And obviously God's like, don't even think about, having this person, be a leader in the church if they're not, and then he has that list, right? But we don't think of it in terms of, are they able to attract people who follow them? Are they able to develop a team around them? And that's really implied in the whole idea of leadership in the Bible as well as in other places too. So it's important not just to look at, are they a good guy, but do people follow them? Do they seem to have a way to attract other people? And that's real important. We set up a lot of, let me make sure. Okay, that's good. I get ahead of myself sometimes. So let's go to chapter 1, unless anybody has any questions about the intro. Just wanted to hit those things real quick. Excuse me. And if you have any questions, just let me know during the course of this, and we'll answer them the best we can. So I love his definition. Leadership is influence. Now, think about it this way. Oh, and I should back up a little bit. One of the things I like about this book is I used to say there's no Bible references in it, but of course, when people read the books and you make big statements like that, usually they'll find there is a Bible reference in there. So I'll see if you find it later down. So he's like, there's a Bible reference. And I'm like, oh, okay. But there's one in the whole book. The reason I like that is because our movement, we have a tribe, the Restoration Movement, Churches of Christ, Christian churches, and we all have, there's good things about it. I can't think of another group that I'd want to be a part of. But we all have our own issues as different groups and stuff. And one of our issues is if it's not biblically correct, we tend to throw everything out about it. So a lot of times we'll have books on leadership by whoever is writing it. And if we can find something wrong with the book, we just toss the whole thing away and say, they don't believe in whatever. And what I like about this book is we're not talking about biblical theology. We're talking about how can you lead and grow an organization. So what I like about it is it's really good for us to really think about, let's apply this, not is it right or wrong kind of a thing. But just to kind of give you some background, John Maxwell was a pastor in San Diego area for quite a long time. And what he was doing was he was preaching sermons, and people in his church were coming up and saying, those sermons you've been preaching this series, I've been doing that at work, and I've got a promotion, or I get my teams out selling everybody else. And so he kind of got the idea, I'm going to write a book about leadership to kind of in the workplace. So this book is kind of geared toward the workplace, and you'll see some references in there, but don't let that fool you. It's called Biblical Wisdom, and the good thing about Biblical Wisdom is it works everywhere, right? The business, it can work at work, at home, so don't let that throw you. There's definitely biblical principles behind all of that, as you'll see in a little bit. Okay, so influence. Why do you think influence is important when it comes to what God's called us to do? Anybody? Can anybody guess? What are some things God's called us to do as Christians and as the church? Okay. Can I do that if I have no influence with people around me? Yeah. People don't like me. People aren't interested in anything I have to say. Guess what? I'm not going to reach anybody for Christ, right? Same thing's true of developing other Christians, right? Growing them in their faith. If people don't like me and I don't have influence with them, so it's kind of a prerequisite to the things God's called us to do. And I like how he breaks it down, because a lot of times we can kind of hide behind words and not really understand how to apply them in real ways. Like I said, this is the best nuts and bolts stuff that I've ever seen anywhere about it. Maxwell's written a lot of books, but this is his best book. And if you read any of his other books, you'll go, hey, that sounds like this book. So might as well stick with the good stuff. The other thing I like about this is it's kind of like the law and the prophets, the stuff that God wrote through Moses. If you read the prophets beyond the law of Moses, what God basically is saying is, or the prophet is saying is, hey, remember that stuff that God said back when Moses wrote this stuff down? It's kind of like, hello, McFly, let's go and do that. So it's always bringing us back to that source. And I kind of look at this as kind of the law and the prophets, the law of Moses, so to speak, for leadership. It's a good reference. There's a lot of stuff in here. We won't be able to talk about all of it, and it'll be pretty detailed, but you can always look back to it and always use it as a reference to kind of to grow and guide yourself with. So that's why I like it, and I coach a lot of pastors with it, and so after we get done with the material, then I can always point back to, well, what about this chapter in the book? Have you done that? Well, no, I forgot about that. Well, let's do that. So it's a reference point for people to do that. So a couple of examples, and I think it's actually in the Echo, if you bothered to read it, because you saw my name on the writing it this time. But I had a couple of examples in that about influence, right? So a couple of people that influenced me really well was my English teacher. I was in a non-English track. I was going to play rock and roll and be cool and, stay out late and play rock and roll and sleep until 2 o'clock, in the afternoon. That's all I wanted to do, right? And she really got in my face and told me, Mike, you're smart. You should go to college, and that I just remember that, God used that later to give me confidence to do that. And then my football coach, obviously, too. When we lost to Dodge City, we actually had to get out of Dodge. It was kind of funny, kind of ironic. You get beat. But that was, the state championship. We had to get out of Dodge. We lost. And our coach, when we got back, took showers and stuff, he put his arm around me, which is, he's kind of a scary guy, your football coach. And he just, said, Mike's going to be successful at whatever he does. And that was something I've always, if you're like me, most, like my folks didn't know what to do with that, because, they were kind of raised where you don't compliment people because you'll make them soft, right? So they were tough on me. And so if you're like me, you didn't hear a lot of kind words, right? So when people do give you kind words, you remember those and you carry those around. And that's really kind of the idea of influence, that we can help other people develop and be encouraged. It gives us those long-lasting impressions. The issue is not whether you influence someone. What needs to be settled is what kind of an influencer you will be. You will grow. Will you grow into your leadership skills or abilities? And of course, we know that Hitler was an amazing influencer, right? But no one wants to call their kid, name their kid after him or whatever, right? He was pretty evil. So it's like anything else. It's a tool. You can use it for good or for evil kind of a thing. We've all seen politicians where we go, oh my goodness, right? The guy's really good, but I don't trust him because whatever kind of a thing. So, and that's all I'll say about politics tonight. But anyway, so here's how this works. And we create a lot of bottlenecks in organizations, and that's true of churches too. And what a bottleneck is just basically a bottle, kind of upside down kind of a thing. And so, does anybody work at the post office? See, I've learned the hard way. Iowa's a small town, so you have to be careful what you say. So anyway, okay. So that's good. I'm probably safe then. So the post office in Urbandale, where I live, there's a lady there, and she's She's a little East Indian lady, and that's what we call that group of people in California. So don't mean to offend anybody, but they're from India, right? Not here. But anyway, she's this little East Indian lady, and this will date me, but she walks and moves like Mrs. Higgins. Remember that from the Carol Burnett show? So she'd just be like, like this, and then very sweet, nice lady, but it's like, you need to pick another career, right? Because you're killing me, right? I mean, it's like, so she's the only one there, right? And the line's backing out the door, right? And we see somebody like move in the back, and we're all like, oh, good, someone else is coming. But it's like, no, his union job is to sort the mail, right? Or to taunt us and not to come and help. So we're all like, oh, right, And what do you do when you're in a long line and it's not moving? Well, I don't know what you do, but I complain. What's going on, right? So we're all complaining. We're not happy. We're all grumpy, right? And stuff like that. So one day I was at Hy-Vee, and I walk out, and I went like, wait a second. I walk back in. What did I see? And it said, official U.S. Post Office. And I'm thinking, really? I mean, could this be like a manna from heaven? I'm okay. So I'm going to try this out next time, right? So I go, bring my stuff that I got to mail, and there's somebody in front of me, and then it was me, so it's not technically a line yet, and then someone comes behind me. And it was like, those rock concerts where the drummer comes out of the floor, and people were rappelling out of the ceiling. I mean, it was like people were coming out of the woodwork to open up registers, and I was out in like 5 minutes. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, wow. But, that's how they do it at Hy-Vee, whether it's the post office or whatever they do. And what's great about that is they're smart enough to know what? That Mike has money, right? CEM has money. CEM needs to mail stuff. So if Mike is going to give his money to the post office, right, which does this, right, we're all bottlenecked, trying to get through that one person. And Hy-Vee is smart enough to know, why don't we make it to where Mike wants to come and spend his money and CEM's money, at Hy-Vee instead. And so what's cool is they've opened up that bottleneck so that I don't have to deal with this. I can deal with this. And how they do that is they train everybody to do everything. It's kind of like in the military, right? And one of the dangers of war is, and in the military when you're defending your country, is that people die, right? So if the guy next to me, my buddy, something happens to him or he gets wounded, I can jump over and take his job because I know how to do it, right? And so if we think about this just from a bottleneck standpoint, we want this, not this. But what's happened is we have actually created a situation in our churches where we have this thing called the decision-making board. And I call it that because it could be anything. And we could say and or the pastor. Or even maybe the staff, depends on how you're doing it. So either the pastor is jamming up everything, or the decision-making board, and that could be elders, that could be deacons, that could be elders and deacons, that could be, some churches, elders can outvote the deacons, or the deacon, it gets complicated, but anyway. Trustees, you could throw that in there too, just for fun. So whenever we jam up something where everybody's waiting on one person or one group of people to do everything, people get frustrated. And in my relatively short time in ministry, about almost 30 years or so, people who get excited about serving God, they don't grow on trees, right? And so you don't want to get them jammed up into here complaining, and then eventually they're not interested anymore. You want this happening. You want we want to empower people, get them excited, get them trained, and be accessible for them so that they can move through that. So that's what I like about this stuff. It really helps identify some things that we can really help grow our church. Let's see. Let's look at the 5 levels of leadership. What page is that on? It looks like, I always think it's a cake because I'm always hungry. But it's a stair, I think. Stair step. 13. Page 13? Okay. Does everybody see that? Okay. So let's go ahead and look at that. This is really worth the money for the book, and I'll say that a lot. So tonight will be open book test, which means next week we're going to try to do this on our own. And the reason I want you to memorize this is it's really good, and it will really help you working with others. So what's the first level? Position. Good. What's the next one? Good. And the next one? Production. Good. And the next one? People development. That looks kind of funny. Oh, well. And the last one? Okay. You don't have to. I mean, God will like you more if you do. No, I'm just kidding.
You want to know if you had.
Oh, do I?
You don't have memorized.
Well, I was testing you guys. I'll prove it by filling the rest in for you. How's that? Well, you guys are going to keep me on my toes, aren't you? Okay. Now, if you needed proof that this is a Christian book and this guy's a pastor, just look at this. See? They teach everybody to preach like that. Alliteration, PPP. I think this is the lamest personhood. What does that mean? But he had to have a P, so anyway. And again, who am I to tell him what to do? He knows what he's doing. So anyway. So positional, permissional, production, people development, and person. 5 levels of leadership. Fantastic stuff. So positional is all about rights. So this guy down here is the guy he's the boss that you always hated. Now, we probably all have stories of that. And if your boss is here, you don't want to tell that story because you might get in trouble. But my favorite boss I always hated was the guy that it was kind of like Home Depot for grocery stores, meaning Home Depot is like a working warehouse. So this was like a discount grocery store where it was concrete floors. It was, they kind of basically brought the stuff in and dropped it in, and people just came in and grabbed it. It wasn't real fancy. And so my boss was showing me around the place, telling me all the stuff I needed to do. I think it was in high school. Yeah, it was like one of my first jobs. And telling me all the stuff I needed to do. And it's Wichita. And Wichita, it's kind of cowboy country. Everybody smokes, so he's smoking, and this is before they banned smoking, So he's just smoking, and he's telling me everything he needs to do. He throws it on the ground, steps on it, and then he goes, "Oh, yeah, that reminds me. You got to sweep the entire floor," I'm thinking. And I watched this guy. He created like 80% of the cigarette butts on the ground, right? Because most people they're not going to drop their cigarette butts in a store, but my boss did. He just thought it was cool, right? So I hated this guy, right? So I did absolutely bare minimum with that job because I had no respect for the guy, right? The guy's creating work for me. He's not helping me out. So I was, I did what I was supposed to do, and then I was gone, right? So he's the guy so the idea is you don't want to be this guy, right? Just about rights. Do it because I said so, that kind of thing, right? I'm your parent, like Bill Cosby said. I brought you in this world and take you out. That's positional. I'm your dad, right? I'm not saying you can never do that. I'm just saying don't stay there. Don't do that for everything, obviously. So the permission one is about relationships. And this is real crucial because this is the boss you liked, the idea that, or the person that you liked, the idea of connecting with people in a relational way. So I'm actually asking people to follow me, basically. I'm asking for permission, right, because of our relationship to kind of get on board and move to the next level, right? And this one takes the longest of all of them, and it takes a lot of time. This is why people don't like to be leaders, because it takes a lot of your time to really do this well, build relationships with people, and keep those relationships going. But it's so important that we do that. Now, we're tempted a lot of times to skip this and just go right to production. But like any kind of a structure, if I pull this out of a structure, this bottom thing, what happens? Yeah, crash, right? It'll fall. I need to get some Jingo blocks. What are those? Jenga? What are those? Yeah, those are kind of cool. That's what happens, And the reason is because if I am pulling this out, right, or if I'm skipping over it, the person here is going to feel used, right? And why? Well, because I'm using them. I don't really care about them. I am just trying to get them to do what I want, right? We're just kind of let's get something done. I don't really care how you feel, what you think, or anything about your kids, right? I just want to get this done, kind of a thing. Even if we're not saying that, if we just get right to business, so to speak, without connecting with people, then that's what happens. Even in the workplace, something to keep in mind, in case I forget. So this book's kind of geared to the workplace, right? And we're kind of more a volunteer organization. So just think about this. Employees are kind of like dogs, right? You can get dogs pretty motivated by, shiny toy, food, whatever, bone. And employees, you can do that too. You can say, hey, if you have this done by Friday, I'll give you a $1,000 bonus, right? This guy could be the biggest jerk in the world. I don't like him, but he's going to give me $1,000. I'll get it done. Or the opposite way is, if I don't have it on my desk by Friday, you're fired, right? Well, that's pretty motivating too. I need my job, right? So I get motivated. You can't do that in a volunteer organization, right? People will be like, volunteers are more like cats, right? You can't make a cat do anything, right? We got one of the friendliest cats in the world, but if she didn't want me to pet her, it ain't going to work. And my trying to pet her is more like, trying to, pet a tornado. It doesn't work, you have to kind of act like I'm having the best time in the world. All the cool people are over here. We're just having a great time, and the cat's thinking, hey, I'm missing out over there. And so the cat kind of comes around. So, that's how you lead volunteers. So you just think of that in your mind when we're going through this. So if you think, but at the same time, if I'm working in a company, right, and I'm working for this guy, and another job opens up where I could work with this guy, close enough money, or it's just not worth the headache, right? Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go work for that guy. I have a friend of mine, he's a consultant now, but he started out, I won't name the company in Des Moines because maybe you work there. But anyway, he used to work there, and so they were asking him to do some consulting for him. And he's like, well, he shot him a number. And the person that he was contacted with goes, are you sure? And he's like, yeah. She's like, that's like 3 times the going rate. And he's like, I know, I used to work there. That's for pain and suffering. And she's like, okay. So he factored it in. He did not want to work with them anymore. But he figured, hey, if they want to pay me 3 times as much, I'll consider it. Of course, they didn't call him back, right? But see, he didn't want to work with people that were just, that company is just about this. It's just about making people do what they tell them without any kind of relational dynamic to it. So anyway, yeah, you don't want to skip this. This is why, too. Well, Mark Driscoll, the pastor of that huge church in Seattle, he got a lot of flack for stuff. He's actually a really good speaker. He's a very gifted leader, and I know he messed up in a lot of ways. But what happened in that situation was, in a lot of churches, that they'll just do this. They'll just like overnight or in a short amount of time, they just climb to the top. Companies do this too, right? Or causes and organizations. And then it's like overnight, like what happened in Seattle with Mark Driscoll. He just, boom, it was done. He left, and then the whole thing just shut down. This is what happens here. They skipped over that. And if you pull that out, it's only a matter of time for everything to crash down. So this is so important that we don't pull this out when we're building and moving things forward. Another example, and the reason I'm talking about this is it's such a huge deal. The guy that planted a church before us in Chicago, when my wife and I planted there, he's kind of a big brotherhood guy, and I won't say who because you might know who it is. And it's fine to be a big brotherhood guy, a big movement in the brotherhood. Everybody knows him, in our tribe or our Christian church. And that's great, and I'm glad he was able to contribute that. But a lot of times guys like that, they don't spend a lot of time in their located ministry, and that's not always a good thing. So he had this guy, he was their worship pastor, and this was before they had executive pastors. But this guy was really the executive pastor. In other words, he was really leading the church. He was running the church. He was organizing it, making sure that everything was working right. And he kept bugging the guy that was the leader, right, to have a cup of coffee with him. He's like, let's just meet for a half an hour a week. I just need to be able to bounce things off because you're not here, and I don't know if what I'm doing is what you like. I don't want you coming back and being, and so the guy just didn't have a half an hour for him. And the guy left, and it crashed. So it's important that we spend time with people while we're building and growing as far as this leadership thing goes. Okay, good. So production is all about results. And this is kind of the idea of working at getting something accomplished together, right? Whatever it is. People want to be a part of something bigger than themselves, so this is kind of taps into that. People development is all about reproduction. So in case you're wondering about how does this fit biblically, well, Jesus said something about relationships, didn't he? There's 2 things, 2 greats Can you guys guess? Which one is about relationships? The great what? Any guesses? Good. Absolutely. Love the Lord God, all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? That's this, right? That's what that's biblical as you can get. And this is, of course, the great what? Oh, yeah. I was going to write it again. Great Commission. Oh, actually, yeah. I was going to change this. That's more of this one. But this one is more there's that, I forgot the reference. It's where Jesus was tempted. It says, worship the Lord and serve him. So more kind of serving God. And there's a lot of Bible passages like that. Actually accomplishing things, right? And the church is described as an army. You know, armies don't just sit around and hold hands and sing, right? They actually, go out and do stuff. Now, a lot of times churches will either be one or the other, right? We'll either be like, we're an army and we kick rear end and take names, right? Or we hold hands and we love each other. We're a big happy family, right? So what I encourage people is, it's great that you're a family, just don't be a dysfunctional family, right? So you need to also be involved in getting some things done too, not just all the kumbaya stuff. And you don't want to just have it all about, doing things, because you're going to skip over that, and eventually people will get worn out and tired, right? Why am I doing this? Do people even care about me, right? That kind of thing. So it builds on each other, and it goes together. And the people development is, like Jesus said, go make more and better followers, right, or disciples. And so the idea is that we are reproducing these two pieces as we kind of connect with other people. The last one, personhood, is about respect. So you can think of the song. So if you're trying to sleep tonight, you can think that song. You'll be like, why did he say that? So R-E-S-P-E-C-T, right? That's how you get some soul into this lecture, right? You got to put, is it Aretha Franklin? Yeah, you got to put some of that into this. So basically what's interesting is, the irony is, the guy down here, he's demanding what? He's demanding respect, right? But he's too lazy or slothful, or whatever word you want to use, or just no one sat down and helped him do this. One of the things in life that's kind of tough is when you think through, like one of the reasons I like to coach guys is, and I told this guy I started coaching yesterday, was that, you think about it, no one cared enough about me to set me down and say, hey, Mike, I've learned a few things, and I could help you if you want me to. No one cared enough about me to do that. And it's kind of sad, and I work with a lot of groups, starting a couple churches and being a pastor of a local church. And so I like to be the guy that I didn't have that guy, so I want to be that guy for the next guy. And I think that's kind of God's heart, right? One of the reasons why God allows bad things to happen to us is that the world is so void of this leadership thing, this being there for people. And when we go through the pain of no one's here to help me, right, then God's trying to get us to see, hey, you be that person for that next person that they're not there for. So it's real important that, so anyway, a lot of us just weren't trained to be a part of this and do this. So anyway, respect. So this is how this works. So a couple of examples. Greeting. So let's say I'm a greeter and people are coming in, and I find out that this person's brand new. They've never been here before, right? And so they come in and I say, oh, let me get the pastor or get our elder or get whoever, right? And I'm going to go get them, and they go get them and bring them up. And you have a title for them. This is pastor so-and-so. This is elder so-and-so or whatever, right? And so you start right here, right? Because the person doesn't know anything about you or anybody here. Now, if you use the title pastor, that could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing, or it could be, I don't know what that is, so just checking things out, right? So you're starting down here, right? So you know where you need to start. How this works better is if you have coworkers, friends, neighbors, whatever, you're praying for them, you're spending time with them, you're being relational with them and encouraging them, and then they eventually come. You see them coming in, and you go, oh, my goodness, it's so-and-so. You go get them and say, oh, let me introduce you to our pastor. Pastor so-and-so, he's a great guy. He was there when my dad, he helped bury my dad, he helped marry my kids, whatever. You're going to love this guy. What did I just do? I just brought all this relational stuff that I've been working on my friend, neighbor, coworker, and I've transferred that to the pastor guy or whoever it is. So that's how this works and how it's real important that way. Another way this works too is, let's say, from the pulpit or whatever, we talk about we need, nursery workers, right? We need more workers in our nursery. So I'm sitting out here on the pew and I'm thinking, what? Nursery? Ew, right? Kids? I don't like kids. There's no way I'm going to hang out with kids. They smell bad. They're sticky. They're noisy. They're they're too much energy. No, I'm not changing the diaper either. So I just sat on the pew, and that's it. And we still need nursery workers, right? Or I can do it the way that it actually works. Very few things actually work from announcements from the pulpit, and I'm not picking on anybody. It's just we were trained that way, but it doesn't work. What you end up getting is usually people you don't want working with the nursery kids, right? It's just, okay, well, we'll call you, right, kind of a thing. So what actually works is if I build a relationship with whoever it is, right, and we're drinking vitamin water, Darjeeling, I can't even say it, tea, coffee, whatever it is people do, right, having a soda. And we meet on a regular basis, and I get to know you, and you get to know me, and we have a really good friendship, right? And then right before I leave, I say, hey, you know what? I volunteer at my church, on Sunday, and I could really use your help in the nursery, and we're shorthanded, and could you help me, right? And you're saying what? Kids, ew. And in your head, you're like, no, I don't like kids. They're dirty, smelly. I'm not changing a diaper. Same thing as you say in the pew, but what? You say yes. Why? Because I'm your friend. And I want to do it because Mike asked me, or because, that actually works. So they come, and they find out that either one, they don't like kids, and this was a total disaster, but, there's some nice people at that place, and there's some guys that, like to shoot stuff, and I think I'll hang it, you know what I mean? And that's kind of how but if you do get a nursery worker, and they say, man, this isn't all that bad, what you've actually done is you've involved them in this process of helping you out in the nursery. And then what you do with them is say, how we kind of spent time together, and then I asked you to help. Yeah, well, could you do that with somebody else? And that's how we get to this. So you say, find somebody, build a friendship with them, and then after you've got a good friendship with them, ask them to come and help out in the nursery. And what you've actually done is you've reproduced yourself. And obviously, this is true of anything. And what's interesting about this is in the process, you can bring a lot of people to Christ this way, because you're not just hitting them over the head with it, because a lot of people have preconceived ideas about church and all that. But if you have a friendship, a relationship here, it makes a big deal. Now, why is reproduction important? Well, I like to think of it this way. If everybody just decided tonight, that around the whole world, no more babies, right? We're not going to have any more babies. That's it. What would happen? Yeah, the world would be over at some point, right? When it'd be done, right? Now, the same is true of a church, a business, a company, anything. Whenever you stop reproducing yourself, you're done. It's only a matter of time, and you won't be around anymore, right? And I've seen a lot of our churches in the state do that. They just don't reproduce anymore, right? And this is how you do that. You go through that way. How respect works or personhood is, this is kind of what people feel about your organization, right? Your church. When you say Woodland Hills Church of Christ, people have an impression of that. A feeling rises up inside of them about that. When I was started out, I won't say where because again, I was a small town. When I started out, I would go and meet people in the community, and they'd find out I was the pastor of the church, and they'd go, and we got along great. And they go, I'd never go there. And I go, really? Why? Well, as long as so-and-so goes there, I'll never go there. I'm thinking, okay, he's the chairman of the elders. Okay, and then I go to, it happened. They like all my elders, different people in the community were saying, yeah, I'd never go there. I was like all 5 of them. They were all saying that. I'm thinking, okay, this isn't going to work. How am I going to bring people to Christ into our church when their reputations are so bad? There's no way they're going to come, right? So that's this idea, is this kind of idea. We call it branding, right? It's kind of the cool new word, but that's all it is that people have a particular expectation or a feeling about the organization. So for instance, I go to Come and Go or Casey's, and they have them all over the state of Iowa and even into Missouri now and all over the place. But because I know what I'm going to get, right? And I had to get on the come and go folks because they're running out of breakfast burritos. And, when I travel, I'm thinking, hey, man, you got to get your stuff together, right? And I'm offended. And, and they're like, they have them all over the place. It's nobody's fault, but you know what I'm saying. So how this works is if I do a good job with this and people do a good job with this in my church, right, in our church, I should say, right, what happens is people will be like in the community, I'm not into church and that God stuff. I just would never go to church. But I really like that Woodland Hills Church of Christ. I really like those people that go to church there. They're great people, And a lot of times people will say, if anything happens to me, to their wife, I want the pastor of that church to bury me, right, or do my funeral. It's amazing how that kind of stuff happens. And you know how God works. God has a way of making us uncomfortable in our situation, especially if we're not connected to him. And, God starts squeezing you, and people really start waking up and saying, you know what we're doing is not working. We need answers or whatever. Hey, let's, that guy at work goes to that church that I really like, or I like him a lot. Let's go try his church out. And that's how this works, and that's why this is really important. Let's see. I think that's pretty much most of it on this. Is there any questions about the 5 levels from anybody? Yeah.
This is going to be a little bit of a challenge because it seems very difficult to develop it in this direction. Because what happens is you're trying to get permission from someone or develop a relationship, and people will not let you even do any development with them, produce any results, and get to the point where you have a relationship, unless they first respect you. So it seems like it goes exactly the opposite direction as far as people allowing you to
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
this level.
Right, you're saying that it goes the exact opposite way. I would say that kind of goes back to, and that's one of the chapters in the book, the trust. If you don't have trust, none of this works. Obviously. But that kind of goes back to here. If you're not who you say you are in this situation, people aren't going to want to hang out with you. So the challenge with starting there, though, is you have to be relational. And I know people respect that aren't relational, and you really can't have influence with people that you respect, but you don't have any relationship with them, if that makes sense. So,
Right.
at least I say a positive way.
Okay, so they say it in here as it's easier to lead as you go up the higher levels. Correspondingly, people look for the higher levels first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you have to prove that you're at that higher level before they'll let you go to the next lower level. So you have to prove that you're a respectable person
Right.
before they'll let you.
Right. And I would say don't let this word, the respect word, throw you. I would say that's more of a trust thing. And a lot of this works together. I mean, if my organization is known for having all this stuff together, then people are more apt to get involved with that. But we're talking about like positively influencing people, not just being the boss like in the work situation, Because, for instance, there are people that have more influence that are like janitors in organizations than the president does. It's because they're more connected with people relationally than, the people on the top. Some organizations like Chick-fil-A, they are really good at this stuff. And the people that are at the top are actually doing all this stuff. That's not necessarily true of most organizations, but they really are intentional about developing people in that kind of a way. So, but I see what you're saying.
It's like developing that trust works.
Yeah.
And I think in here where you have respect, it's not necessarily, like you were saying, as for the individual.
Right. So
As it is more for the organization,
Right.
or even as I read this, I saw this as more of almost like this is a Billy Graham, right? He's almost up there just because of the persona that he brings.
right.
But that's what I'm saying, is that people are starting with that expectation.
Yeah.
And then if you're not up to it, then they lose the trust for the rest of it. So like at
Right.
work, I'm never going to get a position as a manager until I can show respect that I'm developing people.
Right. And it takes time. Yeah, absolutely. I see what you're saying. Well, a good example of this is, you always start, and what's good about committing this to memory is you're at different levels with different people. That's kind of how this is valuable. So you're not at the same level with everybody. So for instance, when we started the church in California, I was kind of right in here with most of the people that had been there at the beginning because we were there for 13 years, and I brought a lot of them to Christ and was involved in a lot of their lives, and they knew that they could count on me. They knew I cared about them, that kind of a thing. Now, the minute that we left California, I came out here and became the executive director of CEM, I dropped to here, right? Last time I was in the state was about 25 years ago or something like that, maybe more than that. When I first came here about 20 years ago. So I just had this title. I'm the CEM director. Okay. That just means nothing, right? Oh, you have Brod's job, right? Right? And so I went from developing people, right, in my church to having being the guy with the title, right? So I would encourage, guys and try and go to. So what I did is I developed a lot of relationships. I went to all the ministers' meetings. I still drive about 3,000 to 4,000 miles a month, or maybe more, like 4 to 5. But anyway, just spending time with people. And it took about 3.5 years before somebody finally said, hey, could you help me out, or could you coach me, right? So starting to do this. And one of the things I learned was because CEM, a lot of our churches in the state are struggling, they're not apt to, here's like some money to help you start a church with or whatever. A lot of times I was getting letters that saying, we can't support you as a mission anymore. So it was like, okay, me coming alongside of them saying, hey, let's start churches together wasn't going to work. So it's like we need to help our existing churches so that they can be healthy and grow, because we want people to come to Christ. We want them to be healthy and grow. And then we want them to be in a position to where they can help us start churches. So this took about 3.5 years to actually get me to be doing like what I'm doing right now. But I had to do this a lot. In fact, that was my job for like the first 2 years, is just making relations with people. And then finally, somebody gave me a chance. And I don't know if they had a lot of respect for me or they had a lot of, trust in my abilities, because, all I have to do is, I did that in California. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, right? But what happens is a lot of guys, especially the younger guys, the guys that are about my age, they tend to think they know everything already and there's not much you can do. They're just convinced they're right, and it's like, okay. But the younger guys kind of get into positions and they realize they're over their head and they need help. And so they're kind of like, I was the next guy around. It's like, you got a life preserver? Help me out, guy. I don't know if you know what you're doing or not. And so what happened was people gave me chances, and when they found out, then we started turning their churches around. The word got out that, and that kind of, like what you were saying, you got to have some of that. So I don't know how God works all this out, but I do know that you have to build on these, and for it to actually be sustainable and a long-term kind of a thing.
I can give you an example out of business of work. I worked for a bank for 23 years, and it was a big bank, and it changed and all this, and different mindset, a little bit of fear, very rigid, you're put in cubicles basically.
Yep.
And I went to another bank, and I knew a couple people there, but it was a smaller bank. But what happens is it begins to build a culture.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the bank, and somebody wanted some copies of checks. Well, now you click at the internet or whatever.
Yeah.
Ways back more than a couple months. And where I was at with this big bank, the charges were more too, by the way. Priority for government was 4 weeks.
Wow.
So I called the bookkeeping department and said, how long will it be? And they don't know me hardly. I'm just new there. Will it be to get these copies? He said, well, it's going to be a while. So you know what I was imaging up.
Right.
So I said, well, what's a while? He said, well, somebody's using the machine. It could be a couple hours.
Wow.
And I was actually, even early on, because I had some experience, was empowered
Yep.
to make some decisions. We could call each other
Mm-hmm.
and actually talk over situations.
Right.
There was order. There were limits to your empowering, but
Right.
there was a route to go beyond that.
Right. Right.
And it just freed you up. And boy, after that little experience, you don't think I started bragging on that bank?
Exactly.
Hello?
Exactly. Absolutely.
You want to go out and actually make calls.
Right.
Calls, which people hate.
Yeah.
I hate. But,
Yeah.
it did. You have a story to tell.
Yeah, and what's neat about that is God created all of us to be, to find what it is that we're good at and flourish in that, right? And a lot of times in business or in companies, we kind of they want to turn us into robots and stick us into these pegs and stuff, and round peg in a square hole kind of a thing. And so, yeah, that's absolutely true. And, and what's kind of interesting. Yeah. Yeah, you had those gopher holes where you pop up. I had a job like that too. Yeah. Yeah, I worked for a company. It blew my mind. They were, the guy that was the CEO had a cubicle like we did. I mean, it blew my mind. The guy's like right there. And you're like, but it sends a message, right? Hey, we're a team. We're going to work on this together, right? I'm not better than you just because I have a title, right? Kind of a thing. And that's kind of the idea of this, is we want to empower people. Because the normative Christian experience is, I come to Christ, I'm baptized, and not only do I grow in Christ, but God is calling me to something. God is calling me to a ministry, right? Maybe I'm going to lead it. Maybe I'm going to be a support person. But I have a calling just like the pastor or the elders or the deacons. And being accessible to empower people to do that, kind of like this long highway thing, like we're talking about, instead of the bottleneck thing, is just really, really important to be able to do that. And one of the things that, I had to learn the hard way too is being accessible. A lot of times we think leaders are, they make all the decisions, but it's actually the other way around. And we'll talk more about that in another setting. But but I need to be accessible for people, to be a resource to them and to be, an encouragement to them. And so one of the things that I struggled with was I used to think that I had to have an answer for people right away. So someone would email me, and I go, okay, what do I tell them, right? And I'd have to think about it, and then I'd get a phone call, and then I'd have an appointment, and then I would get 50 emails, right, all at once. And then I forgot about them. So what did they think? They got this exciting idea they want to do in the church, and I haven't talked to them in months. What do they think? They think, well, yeah, well, Mike he's a jerk, right? He says he wants to do all these things, but he doesn't, right? Or that he doesn't like my idea, right? We start thinking all these crazy stuff. So hopefully what I try to do now is get right back on stuff, right? And that's what's neat about phones. You can just kind of hit emails right back and just say, that's a great idea, let me think about it, or I'm in a meeting right now, or whatever, And so that way, if I'm accessible, let me call you back at 3 or whatever, or it's not me you need to talk to, you need to talk to so-and-so. So I'm trying to learn to do that, but being accessible is a really important thing for people, to empower them to do those things. A couple of stories I really like from this chapter I want to point out while we still have some time here is I like the pecking order one, I think in the level 2. What page is that? Does anybody have that? 7. Okay, where it says the agenda is not the pecking order. I'd underline this. If I know some people, you can't write in the Bible or books, so that's against your religion. But if it's not against your religion, underline this. The agenda is not the pecking order, but people development. On this level, time, energy, and focus are placed on the individual's needs and desires. So what's great about this is it's what Jesus said, right? We don't, we're here to serve, not be served, right? So the idea is not leadership, and you guys read the story about the hen pecking thing. I mean, it's hilarious, right? So you have, everybody gets to peck somebody except the one little hen, and everybody pecks on him, right? And the world's like that, right? I mean, I've worked for companies like that. I've been around people like that. Man, it's just like, oh, come on, guys, grow up. Really? We're going to do this? You know what I mean? And you don't like being there. You can't wait to leave, kind of a thing. And that's why influence is really important, because what influence really is do people like who they become when I'm around them, right? So what tends to happen is if Mike shows up, one of two things are going to happen. They're either going to go, oh no, it's Mike, and they're going to run. You ever done that? Like when you see somebody coming and you hide, behind the bread aisle or something? Now, I would never do that, but you just don't want to talk to them. Why? Because when you're around them, you get this fight or flight thing. You either want to pop them in the nose or you want to run, because they're just oppressing you, right? There's a guy that always asks me stuff about CEM, and I fall for it all the time. And he just kind of puts the thumb screws on me. It's like, oh, man. And I've known this guy for decades. I knew him before I got my CEM job and came back here. But he just leans on people, and he goes through staff like crazy. Nobody wants to work with him, kind of a thing. So either we push people, and we have this inner conflict, and we don't want to be around them, or we pull people. And that's the other idea about influence is pulling people, right? Not pushing them. And that's an old Eisenhower, if you like leadership stuff. Eisenhower, the reason he was able to lead these crazy generals that, generals don't like to take orders from anybody. He was able to lead all these generals and help us with World War II because he knew that you pulled people. You don't push them. He was really good at that, right? And so we want to create teams that pull together. That's how this influence thing works and why it's so important, because if I can not be the decision-making board where I'm jamming up everything, but I'm more of let's empower people, let's equip them, let's train them, let's get them excited about leading a team, and then everybody on their team pulls together kind of like the tug-of-war thing. We're all working together to accomplish what God's called us to do. That's a really huge thing. So if people like who they become when I'm with them, they're going to like seeing me. They're going to feel encouraged and empowered. And that comes from a lot of this, being available for people, encouraging them, walking with them through difficult times. What's also real important, too, is making sure we always start here. I got a good friend of mine. I mean, he's one of the true guys that really he lives at this level, my friend. I mean, the guy's he's amazing. But he doesn't come across like this, right? When he walks into a gas station, wherever, he's right down here because he's just a customer, right? He's not this pastor of this huge church that's growing, right? I got another friend too. It's neat because they'll ask him, who are you and where do you do? Well, I'm so and so, and I, this is my good friend John Seitz. He goes, yeah, I'm in Marion, Iowa. I'm at the church there. That's what he says. He doesn't say, I'm the senior pastor and we're running like about 1,300 now. He doesn't say any of that. He just says, I'm at Marion and, I'm on staff. Wow. Blows my mind, right? But my other friend I'm talking about, he lives on this. The guy is just amazing. And so what he does is he knows how to start here. So when he calls me, he's like, Mike, how are you doing? What's going on? How are your kids, right? He starts right there. Now, we could start up here right away because I know he cares about me, but he doesn't make the assumption that I know he cares about me. He starts right there. And that makes, the reason why people like working with him is he cares about you. That's a huge thing. So you always want to start here. It's kind of like what Jesus said, right? Don't think you're at the head of the table, right? Because that could be bad. Oh, you're in my seat, right? Start, kind of a thing. So it's always good to start here with people, no matter how much history you have with them, because you don't want to take that for granted. Let's see. There was another one. Oh, Diana, you had a phrase out of the book you liked. You want to share that one? What page that's on? The Billy Graham quote. What page is that on? Page 67? 6 and 7. Oh, 6 and 7. Okay.
Is that the one where you want to ask for the post office?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So
The bottom of 6 and the top of 7.
bottom of 6 and top of 7. That's a great story. And it's a good example for leadership, right? So Billy Graham asked this boy, where's the post office, right? And so then he told him, hey, we're having this revival over here. Do you want to come? He's like, well, no. He's like, so I'll tell you the way to salvation is like, if you don't even know where the post office is, why would I, you know what I mean? Why would I follow you, right? That goes back to, like you were saying, that trust thing, which is absolutely true. Let's see. We have a little bit of time. I'm going to go ahead and draw this. And Diana, you have my book, so you kind of have this. It's, I think, on the last page. It's like that quadrant thing. So you can chime in here if I don't fill this in right. So what tends to happen in churches is when we get a new guy, there's kind of like 4 things here. So it's, I think I have it here. So we got older, before, we got older, after, and we got younger, before, and we got younger after. And maybe you've seen this before, but it's kind of a good way. This is how people view the new guy, right? So we go through our process, and we'll talk some about that. And we find a guy, the new pastor guy, right? Here's the tendency. The tendency is so this is older in age, this way. This is younger in age. This is before, I was here before you kind of a thing, or I came after you kind of a thing. So the guy comes in, right? The new guy comes in. And if I'm older than him in age, and I was here before him, I'm going to view him through the lenses of a chaplain, right? And I think Doug does this for a living, right? What do chaplains do, Doug? See, I was testing you. Oh, I do. Right there? All right. I can't spell. That's why I speak for a living. I'm going to have you proof me of my stuff. So what do you do? Yeah. And sometimes people probably ask you to do a funeral, right? Or a wedding or those kinds of things, right? And so people, the new guy, the new pastor, if I'm older than him, like I got grandkids older than you, whatever, right? And I was here before you, I'm going to view you as a chaplain. You're here to bury and marry and do the official stuff. That just tends to be how people see that person. Now, if I'm younger than you are in age, but I was here before you, I kind of view you as kind of like my brother, right? Now, what do brothers do? They wrestle, right? Now, I don't know if that's a good example, but I don't know. Maybe they do. But you just kind of see him as a brother, right? You know, they're kind of, related kind of a thing. Now, if I'm older than them, but I come after them, I kind of see them as kind of like their son, right? And, that's kind of when they're like, oh, I'm so proud of you. And they pinch you on the cheek, and you're like, I'm 25. Why are you pinching me on the cheek, right? But you're just like the son I never had or whatever, right? Kind of a thing. And then this one, if I'm younger than the new guy and I came afterwards, then I tend to view them as a leader. Why? Why do you think that is? Yeah, this is probably the person that brought me to Christ, right? Or they were here. I came in and the pastor was already here, right? And I'm younger than him, so obviously he knows what he's doing. That's just kind of the natural way to do it, right? So the magic thing about, this stuff is we want everybody to view the person as this. And that's kind of when I work with guys, I try to get them to see that the value of this is to get everybody to see you as a leader, right, over time. Because if you don't do any of this stuff, this is the natural way people are going to see you. So you could be doing some great leadership stuff, but they just see you as a chaplain or as a son, and they don't see you as somebody that has influence, with them, kind of a thing, which is real important. So anyway, okay, let's look at the page, was it 18? Is that the last couple of pages there where it talks about? So what we're going to do is some homework. And the last thing I want to do is have you look up some Bible verses too. So the homework is, I think it says list the influencers in the organization or something like that. And then it also talks about list the top 5 influencers, that kind of a thing. And then the sheet I handed out for you to read next week is, I think we're doing chapter 2 and 3. Is that right? Okay. So on chapter 2, turn to page, let me peek at yours here. I'm not sure which one. The priorities one, let's flip it to page, there you go. Sorry about that. Yeah. So page 22, there's a kind of a bullet point that says efficiency is the foundation of effectiveness. Does everybody see that little bullet point thing, whatever it is? So if you move to the left of that or the right of that, there's a body of text right there that kind of helps explain how do you do that, right? How do you determine who the top, the top 5 influencers are in the organization, or the top 20% are, right? So that is a good example of how you do that. So kind of take note of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do chapter 2, and then before we jump to chapter 3 next week, we're going to kind of actually do something uncomfortable, because I like to mess with people. That's my spiritual gift. But we're going to actually write real life people on the board. So be thinking about who you think the influencers are in this church, right? Because we don't want this just to be theoretical. Now, the reason why this is important is when I was younger, I had no idea why church things happened. I knew there was this undercurrent thing that would happen in churches, and sometimes it was kind of strange and kind of weird, and a lot of times it would kind of rear its ugly head and wreak havoc in the churches that I was a part of. And I had no idea what was going on, right? I wish I'd have known 30 years ago, right, before I did my ministry in Iowa and before I started my 2 churches, that it's about influencers. If you don't know who the influencers are, if you don't have a good relationship with them, then usually bad things happen. So this gives us the nuts and bolts on how we can actually not just avoid bad things, but actually move the church to some really, really good things. So that's why it's important to identify who those are. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about politics, but I'll throw this out here real quick. The reason I think we're uncomfortable talking about influencers because, well, that's politics and we're not supposed to be political. The reality is we do need to be political, but we need to be political in a positive way. If someone has influence in a church, that's a good thing, right? We don't want to run away from that and be afraid of it. We need to identify it. We need to work with that and get people on board and move things forward, kind of a thing. So quickly, I need someone to look up Matthew 28, because we've got 8 minutes left here. Matthew 28, let's see, 18 to 20. And someone else look up Matthew 6. I'm sorry, Matthew 8. I tricked you. Sorry. Matthew 8, verse 9. And then 28, 18. Okay, who's got Matthew 28, 18 to 20? Go ahead.
Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age."
All right. Thank you. Wrote the wrong one down. So I'm writing this down because I spent a lot of money learning these words, and I got to find a way to use them to justify all my student loan payments. So mathetes is the original word in the New Testament, or the Greek word for disciple, right? So what he talks about is, go, right, and make mathetes, right? Make disciples. What's interesting about this word is, and my history's kind of rusty on this, but Alexander the Great, of course, when he would conquer people, he would want them to be Greek, right? Because, and it's kind of the idea of Hellenization, being Greek. It's the Hellenai, or what is the Greek word for Greek? But anyway, so he wanted everybody to be a Greek. Why? Because he thought being Greek was the greatest thing ever, because he was trained by, that whole, was it Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and he had direct, information, and one of those guys, I think it was Aristotle, that was actually his teacher that taught him about how great the Greek culture was. So now the Romans would go into an area, and they kind of learned from the Greeks, right? But the Romans would go in, and they would say, okay, you have any gods here? So they'd conquer the town, and they'd say, okay, what's your gods here? And they'd say, okay, we have these gods. Okay, well, give us your gods, and they'd bring out the statues and say, okay, now these are official Roman gods now. We're going to stick them in our god house, or what do they call it, the Pantheon, whatever. Stick them in there with all our other gods. They're official. Now, don't make up any new ones, right? Because if you make up any new gods, that's illegal. And what they found was that people will fight about what they believe in, right? But if they accepted their gods, put them in their little god thing, and they said, now what we want you to do is pay your taxes. So work hard, don't fight among each other, pay your taxes. Other than that, we don't care, right? We don't care anything about our culture, really. Just pay your taxes. That was kind of the point. The point is, pay your taxes, right? If you fight, we're going to come in with our swords again and keep the peace. You don't want that. Now, but Alexander the Great wasn't into that. He wanted everybody to be Greek, so he was different. He would go around and say, you need to become Greek, and you need to learn our language and our culture. That's why the Greek culture is so prevalent. The phrase is that Rome conquered Greece, but Greek culture conquered the Romans. The Romans basically, a lot of what the Romans did was Greek stuff. That's why we call it Greco-Roman architecture or whatever kind of a thing. So he was saying everybody should be Greek. That's why on fraternities, like in colleges and stuff, what do? They have Greek They try to, you learn the Greek alphabet and all that stuff. So it has a lot of influence. So when Jesus says make disciples, he's talking about your whole way of life, right? Not just, just adopt, we want to put you in with the other gods kind of in the God house. Okay, Matthew 8:9, who's got that one?
I know this because I am under the authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go, or come, and they come. And if I say to my slaves, do this, they do it.
Okay. So does anybody know the background of that story about the Roman centurion, the soldier guy? It was either his servant or his son, right, was sick.
His young servant.
Servant, okay. I think it depends. I think the other gospel has a different one, but it's the same idea. So, so he's bringing he wants his servant to be healed, and so he's taking him to Jesus, or they're going to Jesus, and Jesus is getting ready to go, and he's like, oh, I don't want to bother you, right? All you got to do is say the word, and I believe that you'll heal him. And Jesus is like blown away, right? And the idea is this word here, exousia, which is authority, right? So the idea is, I have guys that I tell them to do stuff and they do it, right? And you have power too. You tell whatever, in the sickness world to happen and it gets done. And what's cool about this is, Jesus is like, I haven't seen great faith like this in all of Israel, right? You get this idea of authority or power to be able to accomplish things. What I love about Matthew 28:18 is when he says what? He says, I have all authority in heaven and on earth. That's awesome because, we tend to think that we're the manufacturers of, bringing people to Christ. It's on us to do that, and it's not. All God commanded us to do, as Jesus commanded us to do, is what? Go, right, and make disciples. I have the authority to do that. I have the power to change people's lives, not you, have you ever tried to bring someone to Christ by yourself? It doesn't work, right? They just don't like you. And so like when Jesus said, I'm with you always, is that part of that too. And so he's saying, I have all authority, and he's standing in front of us with, his side opened up and the holes in his wrists, and he's alive, right? That's pretty impressive, right? I have this, basically. I've got this taken care of. You just need to go and tell people this, and I'll bring them to Christ, which I think is pretty comforting and encouraging. And so this is kind of the pinning for all the influence stuff that we've been talking about. Any other questions before we shoot out? All right, well, let me pray quick, and I'll let you go. Father, thanks for tonight and the opportunity for us to get together. Thank you so much for your love for us and for your son. Thank you for this church, and pray you continue to stir our hearts, open us up to the leadership material, and help us understand how to be more influential, Lord, with those around us. We love you. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next